So thank you to everyone that's attended and come to see us and showed us loads of support as well over the last kind of 12 weeks, David?
About that.
12 weeks. Yeah. So we've literally had so many really, really great webinars with some fantastic guest speakers. Is that better?
Yeah.
So we thought that we'd really bring things back to life with COVID kind of on the out. We thought that we'd bring everyone together, have some wine and some beer, and kind of chew the fat really. So I'm joined today by Tom, who spoke to us previously about social values, and we're going to touch upon that. And I've got the lovely Charlotte from Savilles that's going to talk to us about women in bids and the importance of it, and kind of all the interesting stuff that she's been up to really. So we're going to kick off to start with Tom. Now, social value, we spoke about it previously, probably about a month ago.
Yeah.
And we had a great turnout. And the feedback on it was fantastic. And it's a hot subject, isn't it, for a lot of people? Social values and the importance of it in bids, and how do you tackle it?
Yeah.
And how do you go about relaying your social values to your client and the commitment around that?
Yeah.
So do you want to kind of talk us through what that means?
Yeah, of course. Well, nice to meet you all. This is the first time I've done this, which is great. I felt like a stand-up comedian when I got this. Hopefully, well, there's a good first start. What might be useful is if I sort of talk about kind of my sort of background and experience within sustainability and how that kind of has informed a lot of kind of social value and what's now increasingly called ESG with the clients, which is environmental, social and governance, and how the role that I provide supporting clients, I'm often getting an insight into their priorities and the things that are important to them, which then are reflected in the procurement of the supply chain and in the questions and in the bids that you're all responding to. So for me, this is quite a good opportunity to give you some insights into where the sort of direction of travel is in terms of priorities that a range of different clients have got, and how you can reflect that in not only the answers that you're giving to the questions, but probably more importantly, helping your respective businesses around the governance of how they deliver on them. Because the thing that's increasingly becoming evident in terms of the shift, if you like, from social value from a client's perspective is they want evidence. They want evidence of what you previously delivered on a range of these different topics. And so if your response to a big question is we will do this or we will do that, then often you're going to be marked down because you're sort of suggesting what you might do in the future, as opposed to providing evidence of what you've done previously, but also how you would innovate. So in terms of broadly kind of social value and ESG, so there's a Social Value Act, which you're all probably familiar with, which is around government procurement. So that's around taking into account kind of socio-economic and environmental considerations alongside just service provision. So that's kind of the basis of social value. But the investment community, so interestingly, when a developer looks to secure funding for a big project, they'll often get funding from an investor who will have what are called ESG requirements, environmental, social and governance requirements that will be stipulated for that investment. If a company wants, a developer wants to, have £1 billion scheme, they might go to someone like BlackRock that will say to them, these are your kind of ESG metrics that you will need to meet in order to secure that £1 billion. So part of the response you'll see to questions isn't just because people think this is fashionable and flavour of the month, it's also reflecting whether they can secure investment in the scheme in the first place. So after that stage, you then get to a point where the client often has different priorities. And I think the best sort of bit of advice I can give you is to try and identify your respective companies, which key clients they want to work with on an ongoing long basis, and to really meet those companies, social things like this, meet them socially, try and understand what their kind of priorities are and what their kind of drivers are, because each of the clients will have different priorities, and rather than tying yourself up in knots, I think for the roles you're all in, the challenge is there's so much you could do. It's a bit of a challenge. It's like, well, how can we expect it to do everything? I think the thing to focus on is what's key for the target clients that you're looking to work with. So it's all about kind of getting very close to that customer and understanding which of their social value priorities are important. Some of them will be apprenticeships, some of them it might be diversity, equality, and inclusion, other ones it might be around kind of carbon and carbon reduction. So one of the things that I think is really quite an interesting trend that I'm seeing is social value measurement, which people were consistently saying was the key kind of driver. A lot of the clients are becoming a little bit kind of hesitant to jump into bed with any particular social value measurement tool, because there is now such a kind of array of different options out there. They don't necessarily want to align with any one measurement tool, and I think that presents an opportunity for you all to kind of understand what's important to the client, so that when you're responding to the bid questions, you can provide them things that are aligned to their business needs and their business priorities. I think the thing about evidence is that one of the things that I would suggest you do and go back to your businesses and do is look at the questions you're consistently being asked to provide evidence on, and go back to your existing projects, the projects that are live now within your business, and roll out innovative pilots around those sort of topics, whether it be apprenticeships, diversity, equality, inclusion, carbon reduction, waste, and actually use those as kind of evidence of where you've innovated. And I think the bit that's really quite interesting is if you go to an existing client and say to them, we'd like to do something innovatively around digital apprenticeships, for example, or around mental health, for example, that will be something that the client will say, well, we haven't paid you to do this, so why are you? And so you're adding value to that existing project, but crucially, you've then got evidence for your future bids. And because I mark bids as well, so I'll probably mark some of your bids at some point. And it's very interesting because we all agree the criteria for marking the bid. It's very transparent. You might think it always goes to the same people, but it doesn't. It's a very kind of robust methodology about how we score bids, and it's usually about people really, and this sounds obvious, but answering the question. And what I mean by that is when I mark bids, what I'll often see is there'll be a question around apprenticeships, for example, or a specific question around please outline what you're doing around green skills to provide apprenticeships within sustainability. And then the answer will all be about how many carpenters are employed or how many plumbers are employed. Because it's like, oh, it's an apprentice, so we'll just give them the apprentice answer. And that would actually be something that would score really poorly, because although there's evidence there, it's not answered that specific question. And I think that's where you do need the buy-in from your CEOs. So there's 3 strands to ESG. So the E stands for environmental, the S stands for social, and the G stands for governance. And that bit is probably where, as people working on bids, you do need buy-in from the leadership of the organisation in order to get some of these kind of initiatives up and running and delivered. And my advice to you is, rather than going to the CEO who's probably very busy and would say, I haven't got time to look at every single bid, go to a project director that you might have a relationship with, as I said, on an existing project, and try and innovate that way. Because that's the way for that individual within the business to be recognised as an innovator and doing things differently. But it's also a way for you to score highly on these bids, because you're, again, evidencing everything with tangible examples. The other bit that's really interesting, which I think is kind of where the work that Charlotte's doing is very relevant, is there's this whole piece at the moment around how we can think more innovatively around diversity, equality, and inclusion. So how women in STEM roles or women in bid roles can be supported in anything. But actually, going back to the mental health piece, there's a whole piece around neurodiversity and kind of inclusive design and thinking kind of innovatively about how you can support people into different jobs. And the key thing, which keeps coming back, is well-being and happiness, which sounds a little bit kind of out there, but actually, if you think about the the basic premise of social value. It's about improving society and making the world better for people and for the environment. And there's a lot of kind of innovation out there around well-being, which I'm happy to talk to you all about after this. But that's the bit that's becoming quite an interesting theme, about being people-centered. So if you can start to think about how, and this might sound like I'm asking you to reorganize your whole businesses, which might sound a bit challenging, but how cross-functional bits of the business integrate. So HR, for example, how you have a diversity, equality and inclusion program that affects not just your supply chain, but also your direct workforce. But then the other piece is how you can influence your supply chain to be more innovative in what they're doing. Is that helpful as a kind of overview?
Well, the only thing that, and I think I probably asked this on a webinar, Tom, how do you decide from a big perspective of what social value is important to your business? So do you look at your client base and allow them to lead it?
Yeah.
Or do you sit there with your project director, your managing director, and then do you have a conversation around that of what's important to what's at the heart of your business?
Yeah.
How do you match the two?
Yeah.
So it works for both of you? I guess it's got to work for both.
Yeah, that's a really
parties.
great question. So the kind of key metric that is universally used, and I mean this globally, is something called the United Nations Sustainability Goals. They're often called the SDG. And those Sustainable Development Goals, if you're not familiar with them, it's worth becoming familiar with them, because that kind of sits at the top, not just in the UK, but globally, around how people look at this. And then the sort of best advice I would give you is the phrase that people use is they call it think global, act local. So it's like, what are these global topics and issues that we're trying to address, and what is the localized response to that problem? So if you're working in Oxford, which I'm doing some work at Oxford University, the things we're focusing on across Oxfordshire are very different to the things I'm focusing on in Bermondsey with another of my clients. So that's actually kind of adding value and demonstrating that you're kind of looking to understand the local requirement and then combine that with what your corporate response is. And I think that's where a lot of this is about becoming closer to the client pre-bidding. And that's why I think it really benefit you to kind of meet with your existing clients, take them for lunch, go for drinks, try and understand what their priorities are on a project, and do stuff. Just do some innovative, interesting stuff. And if it doesn't work, then it becomes a feedback loop of, we tried this didn't work, we tried that, and it did work. But the thing that I always find interesting is that people don't speak to a client at all until there's a bid, and then they're all over them like a rash. And then the client's like, oh, what a surprise, I've got a load of work, so people won't leave me alone. Whereas actually, talking to the person you've already got work with might sound like, well, why would we bother doing that? Because we're bidding for new work. But actually, that will give you the magic sauce and the insights into what you should be focusing on, because actually your existing client base will probably have the same needs, desires and requirements as the people that you're looking to bid for. The other bit that's probably key to your question is looking at, and you're probably all doing this anyway, but if you look at kind of the clients, the developers that you're working with, their ESG strategies or policies, they'll often be out of date, actually, because what happens is these things get written that reflect regulations and as they were. So you almost do yourself a disservice if you focus on just replaying back to the client what's in their kind of marketing and corporate literature. And that's where the key thing is, find out from your businesses who your target customers are, ring up someone within the sustainability team and go and meet them. And just say to them, I'd like to better understand what your priorities are now. I recognise social value is a constantly evolving topic, and I'd like some insights into what we can do either on existing projects we've got with you or any future projects. And that might sound as though people will say, well, I haven't really got time, but that won't be their response, because they're trying. The reason the sustainability team are the people to engage with is they're like trying to be agents of change in their respective organisations. They're trying to get the main contractors and the supply chain to adopt these sort of approaches. And when I was ops director at Lend Lease in sustainability, and that's your biggest challenge really, is bringing the supply chain in. You can agree everything, which does take time with the board and with Sydney and all the rest of it, but then you get to how that's rolled out across a very, very fragmented supply chain, and it's a whole new ballgame. Actually, the way you do it, in my experience, is relationships. You don't need to know everybody in the industry. You maybe just need a handful of key people that you like, that you trust, that you can, work with, which will benefit both your career and theirs.
With that, and I'm going to say it's probably a side conversation, but social value is definitely the key to that strategic partnership, which everyone wants these days, don't they?
Yeah.
They want that relationship with the client that's honest and transparent and open, and also if you can avoid going to tender or going through a bidding process, it's a hit for us. So it's understanding your client, isn't it, and building that relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's the bit that I kind of found interesting, is that people second guess what the client wants when it comes to bidding, and then everyone's in a mad panic to get all this information over, and then they get a question of what the hell does this mean? Because they're blindsided by this new innovative requirement that clients give them that they've not seen before. And that client will probably have that requirement either because it's in a planning obligation, so it's something that the council has said they need to do, or it's linked to their kind of investment on the scheme, so it's linked to, again, the broader ESG, or it's linked to the company's new innovative approach to some strand of their sustainability or ESG, all of which will change over time. So rather than you kind of second guessing it and then panicking because you don't know the answer to the question, staying closer to the direction of travel and themes and trends is where you can actually end up helping shape the client thinking. Well, one good example is doing some work around the mental health space with a business called OwnMinder, and that was client driven. The clients were saying to me, we'd like to do more about mental health. So we created something that the industry wanted by listening to them. And I think that's the bit that there's people in the roles that you do where it probably make your job a bit more fun and interesting as well. Is to rather be constantly answering questions that are posed to you, start posing challenges and questions to people in the industry. Why don't we try doing something like this? And so I think what you're doing is great. So that's a good example of kind of making it, because I think the very interesting thing about what you all do is that you're shaping what the industry is going to look like, actually. Because if it's not in the contract, it won't happen. So weirdly enough, we often talk about aligning planning, procurement and delivery. So that's the conversation I often have with clients, that you take the requirements that they have and you embed it in the procurement of the supply chain, and you ensure that there's governance and mechanisms to enable delivery. But actually, what you're doing in terms of responding to those big questions, you're shaping every element of that. You're shaping the extent to which apprenticeships will be created. So I'll give you a good example. If you're in your business and the commercial director says, well, we can't possibly employ that many apprentices, we can't afford it because it's not that in the budget. That's where a conversation with the HR department or the finance director about underutilisation of the company's apprenticeship levy, for example, might mean that you're transferring levy vouchers to people in your supply chain, not necessarily employing them all directly within your own business. The other bit, which is kind of linked to that, is whether you can start to create positive role models and case studies that actually are kind of, enabling you to go back to the business and say, well, look, this is someone in the business that's helping us. So you're these people are making. as part of the project I'm doing in Oxford with Oxford University, we were the sponsors of the Oxfordshire Apprenticeship Awards. So I was going around all Oxfordshire, meeting all these wonderful businesses that were doing all this interesting stuff around apprenticeships, and the bit that was most interesting first. But in the end, these people are huge value to our business. They're improving productivity, they're providing support to an overstretched workforce. And so those sort of paradigm shifts in thinking will probably make the job a bit easier in terms of answering this. And this may be incorrect, but I always feel that people are kind of between a rock and a hard place in some ways, because the client wants everything, the business doesn't want you to spend a penny, and you're kind of sat in the middle thinking, well, how do we answer these questions? And that's why I think there's an element of this that is managing up and bringing about paradigm shift in your client's approach to some of these topics, because otherwise it's too difficult. You can't be expected to, answer questions that you haven't got any evidence, experience, or rationale for why you should be picked doing that particular job. So that's why I think a lot of this is think global, act local, keep it very specific to what the requirement is, and evidence. And if you need to bring about a paradigm shift in the business, you say to people, I think this is becoming an increasingly important consideration, which it is. So I think we need to think more strategically about our response to it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tom. And I know that you touched upon this. We were just talking about diversity, which brings us kind of smoothly to Charlotte and Women in Bids. Tell me what you've been up to, because I've heard little things, and we've had a pre-interview chat about what you've been up to. So start from the beginning. Why and how is it going?
Okay. I'm sure some people have heard a little bit about how it all started in the first place. So I'm sorry if this is not the first time you're hearing about this. Way back in 2017, there was quite a few surveys that were done in terms of the industry, and one of them was a bid solutions survey about salary and roles within the industry. And it was pretty clear within that, I'm sure some of you might have seen it, that there was quite a big gap between not only the salaries between women and men in general, but also in terms of within each role themselves. And there was also a gap in the amount of women in those more senior roles as well. So it started a conversation in the industry just generally about what can we do. And after a good few months of debate, not much really happened. And then I don't know how, but Women in Bids was formed, and we decided to do a launch event and just get everyone together and say, okay, who wants to actually talk about this? We got a couple of speakers on board. One evening, very similar to this actually, just put the free tickets online, and I couldn't believe that we had over 90 people turn up. And it was almost like this, wow, okay, this is really a topic that people do want to talk about. And there's obviously way more kind of issues and way more things that people actually want to know and discuss. So that's kind of how it initially started. And then in our first year, we started doing events predominantly in London, Birmingham, Leeds, just to get people together and talk, which is exactly what you guys are doing here. It's almost giving you the opportunity to understand the challenges that everyone has, and obviously specifically in terms of women in bidding. We all realised that, for example, things like, right, we know we need to challenge on ESG. I'm trying to challenge on it, but these senior, predominantly male-dominated boards are not really listening. How can I, maybe as a young female in the industry, actually approach this in a way that gives me some confidence, that gives me some just general clout to be able to go to them and say, this is what I'd like to put forward to you without feeling like they're shot down. Or if they are shot down, how can we almost get back up and go, okay, that doesn't mean we're going to give up. Everyone's experiencing this. What can we try that's maybe different? Do we need to put forward a proposal, or how does that work? That's kind of the first year. And then we decided to go down the route of just giving it a go and doing a conference. So we asked our members what they would like to hear about. They told we found some speakers, and then thus the annual conference was born. From that, we hit COVID pretty much around the same time as our second conference. And I mean, people were ringing up days before going, I think I have COVID, I don't want to come because of COVID. So it was all a bit up in the air. But actually, on the day, it was March think it was the end part of March, just a week before the first lockdown. We had a turnout of about 70 people and almost encouraged that this is something we should do on a yearly basis, and was hoping that we would be able to do it a year later, but obviously couldn't do that. So we then went virtual and started doing some online events, really trying to target quite sensitive topics. We get a lot of people who message us as a team. It's not just me, there's a few of us who say, you know, I don't want to bring this up to my employer, or I don't really have anyone in the industry that I feel that I can speak to. This is something that's going on. How should I approach it? And we're not experts. And we always say that even our speakers aren't necessarily all experts, but they're there to share their own experiences, share what happened with them, share as senior women or men in their teams, how they would actually manage that situation within their bid team as well. And we did quite a few events in the first few lockdowns, and decided that actually about midway through this whole COVID situation that we were finding that people who were attending were getting Zoom fatigue, and we kind of quietened down in terms of our events. And that's why we haven't really been that active past year. We've just worked on our strategy and almost what we want to do when things get back to normal, which brings us to now. We've so far for the past, we just had our kind of 4th anniversary since our first launch, and we've very much been focused on our members and what they want to see. And actually we're going to start doing from this point on is focus more around not only what our members want to see, but also what their organisations need to do as well, because they're one part of it, and actually the organisations which they work within are another. So every single thing that we're targeting in the next year or so is all going to be around, okay, this is what our members can do, you as an individual, things that you can focus on, but actually taking it more to an organisational level. What can you do as a manager? What can you do as a head of bids? What can you do as an organisation as a whole that might actually better support your bid team? That kind of brings us to where we are now. In the next few months, the next year, we're hoping to do another full-day event, not necessarily our annual conference, but something at the end part of the year to bring everyone together again. We're going to start picking up our regional events, specifically in London, Birmingham, hopefully Leeds as well. We're completely open to regions as well. So if you live somewhere and you feel like there's no networking events, let us know, because we're quite happy to, whether there's 3 people, 10 people, 20, we don't mind. It's all about bringing people together. So please let us know. That's kind of the background on where we are. In terms of the industry, it's a really weird situation actually, because what we're hearing from our members is that there's almost pros and cons to everything that's happened over the past 2 years. For example, working from home, there's been so many benefits specifically for women within our industry, meaning that they can deal with their family life and anything else that they might want to get up to in their spare time, as well as being really senior women in bids as well. It's opened up quite a lot of doors in terms of flexible working. Previously, companies were like, no, 9 to 5 in the office every day, and suddenly they've got this flexibility where maybe they're working a little bit more hybrid. However, on the flip side of that, we're also finding that a lot of women are having to do all of the same domestic things that they were doing in lockdown, as we now ease back into this normal working world, hybrid working, possibly even back 5 days a week. And they're almost completely losing some of that benefit that they were experiencing the past couple of years. The same in terms of just generally being heard on calls. That was something that really did drop a little bit during COVID, where people felt actually as a woman, you might not feel that you can stand up to someone as much when you're virtual. You can't really get across your vibe. You can't be that kind of friendly person. It might come across quite cold. Whereas actually in person, maybe have more tricky conversations, and that's a little bit easier. But we're still experiencing this gap where some stakeholders don't want to come back to the office. So even though you might be feeling really great about going back into the office and able to have these conversations and feel a bit more confident, if your stakeholders aren't willing to do that, then you're still hitting that barrier anyway. There's also, as I'm sure a lot of you know, if you're trying to hire in your team, there is like a crazy boom where no one can get anyone in their teams. The salaries are really skyrocketing, which hopefully is great in terms of women in the industry. Hopefully, maybe we're going to see in the next salary survey, which is out at the moment at the minute, that there's a little bit more parity there, because hopefully we're going and getting those higher paid roles. But equally, if you are trying to hire within your team, there's this massive struggle. People are really just, everyone I speak to is just like, we need more people in the team, we don't have enough resource, bids is going a bit wild at the minute, and I know that that's a real issue at the moment. And just generally, I think a lot of people are struggling with this hybrid situation, because how can you confront people that you work with, quite senior people that you possibly work with, to say, actually, we need to work in this specific way, whether that's you want to be at home and you're trying to convince people that actually, please, can we keep continuing to work virtually, whether that's you want to get back in the office and you're saying, come on, come back in, even if it's just for a kickoff call, whatever it might be, trying to get those people to almost align with how they'd like to work is becoming a real struggle. And I think that's something that our industry as a whole, not just for women, are really going to have to think about how we can encourage the right style of working, whether that's for us, whether that's for our organisation, whether that's per bid. It might be that you have a completely different way of working depending on the bid and the team that you're working with. So it's almost, I think balance is the topic for this year, really. How are you going to get that balance with all of these things where you keep the positives from the lockdown, but then also get the benefits of coming back out of lockdown and being able to be back face to face?
That's the thing though in bids, isn't it? I think the big thing is you've got to be versatile. Bids aren't 9 till 5, are they? They're not Monday to Friday. And sometimes if you're looking at a team that are meeting all the time at Hobs that haven't got a graphic designer, haven't got a graduate bid writer, haven't got someone supporting them, and having that gap within your armoury, so to speak, it's really hard, isn't it? And I guess from a manager's perspective, your main aim is getting that bid out the door, getting your marks in, delivering something that's quality to the client, but sometimes at a detrimental impact to your team at times, I guess.
I would say most people in this room probably have worked late nights or weekends on bids, and almost previously it was kind of a rare thing that happened on occasion, whereas being at home, how easy is it to just say, oh, I'll just do another hour, which turns into 2 hours, which turns into you bringing your dinners to your desk. It just almost, it's so natural now to be at home working that we've lost that, actually, where are my boundaries?
Yeah, homework divide type thing.
Yeah, and the benefits of actually, can I quickly chuck the washing on or go and do these errands in the middle of the day, which was really beneficial in the first few lockdowns. We've almost, or from what I've heard, a lot of people have kind of forgotten that that's the benefit. And it's like, well, actually, I don't have time to do that because I've booked my meetings. I know that I do it. Sometimes I look at my diary and it's kind of like back to back, half hour, and then back to back for the rest of the day, and think, actually, this isn't the whole point of flexible working. This isn't the point of having the ability to work from home. You kind of, and that comes back to your point around well-being, which our industry as a whole, I think, has been pretty good at highlighting the impact. And I know I've been to a few bidding events where we talk about, actually, do we realise how high pressured our jobs are as bids people? Do we realise that, you know, we don't stop often, we go from one bid to the next, we don't take downtime, but we almost become so accustomed to it that it feels like the norm. And how do we get to a point where it's almost like a self-check for us, as I said, as individuals, to say, where are my boundaries? Have I been working overtime every single day without realising? Because I've almost changed my hours just to do that because I'm at home and I don't commute anymore. And then equally, as managers and organisations, how can we look and say, am I checking in with my team to see, are you doing that overtime? What's going on? Something that at Savilles we introduced was actually a wellbeing survey to say, okay, at this point in time, what's going on? Are you, do you feel like you've worked a lot of overtime at the minute? Do you feel that you're stressed in your role? And it's quite hard to quantify. Are you feeling stressed, this amount of time or whatever that might be? But just for us as like a senior leadership team to gauge, okay, at this point in time, the team feel that they can manage stress, but they're also feeling like they're working a lot of overtime. What do we need to do to balance that out? And how can we make sure that they know that they can come to us and say, hold on, I've realised that I've been working X amount of hours extra in the past few weeks, whether that's saying, right, well, you've accumulated this much time, take some time off, whether it's, right, I don't want you to do that. Just making it vocal as a manager to say, that shouldn't be the norm. That should be rare. That should be crazy deadline day. Okay, those last few days, yes, you might end up working late, but if you're doing that on a daily basis, you probably don't realise the impact that's having on your mental health. Or on how you feel.
Just on that point, I think it's a great point, is that what I always find strange, and I'm sure people in the room, that clients will often give you deadlines like in holidays.
Yeah.
I don't know why. The amount of times I've seen, for some reason, the client knows Christmas or Easter knows, oh, well, we'll get, it's not work. So that kind of communication between, because you're right, it's cultural. This is what we found with the own minder stuff, is that we were trying to ask how you support someone's well-being at the personal level, it's a preventative and proactive thing.
Yeah.
But how you do it at a company level, but then you have at an industry level,
Yeah.
you have this open communication about saying to clients, it's probably not great, the fact that you're asking all of the industry to submit a bid over their holidays.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that is a choice that the client can make around, and it has a detrimental impact on people's family life and the stress and anxiety thing is interesting, because stress is actually a positive thing that we all have in our lives. It's the anxiety when it strays into, and the thing I think you hit the nail on the head is that if you are in workloads that are unmanageable, the demands are unmanageable, and so an element of that in your sector, then you will see that have a massive impact on people's well-being. So actually, there's a collective both opportunity and responsibility to talk about it as an industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we found the construction industry, a lot of gyms with the construction workers, because they had a prevalence of mental ill health, but it might be the same for your industry. So the kind of big community and the kind of work you're doing is almost, there isn't enough of you from the sound of things. So that sounds good because people are getting better wages, but it also means people are stretched.
Yeah.
And then you've got unrelenting clients pumping out bids that you've got to having to respond to. I remember when I won't mention the company, but I was working for one previous company, and I'd get a phone call at 10:30 at night saying, oh, can you just send me a couple of bits on, and then I get an email and it'd be 3 questions, all about kind of some sort of element of sustainability. And I think there's something about time.
Yeah.
It's really important, and having sufficient time to be able to do things. And then it goes back to your diversity point. It makes it a more attractive industry, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Try and get people to come into it.
And it's interesting with time, because actually where you say, you know, that kind of 10 o'clock email, there's some people in this room would be like, you will never see me responding to it. And if that's me, I want to be asleep by then, it's way too late. But there's other people who actually, they go, well, what I want to do is log off earlier, go have dinner, go spend some time with my kids, go to the gym, do whatever they want to do. And actually, I want to log back on at 8 o'clock at night and work for 2 hours. That's their ideal way of working. Whereas I'm like, after 3 o'clock, it's hard to work. I'm a morning person. I'd rather be up at 6 working straight away. So actually, from a time perspective, just because someone's working late necessarily, that might not mean that they're working crazy hours. It might just be that maybe you've created a team. And I know that there's quite a few companies who do really well within the bids industry, where flexible working is so well kind of embedded that they've got the trust, they've got the kind of plans within their team, that they're very well communicated as well. You know that that's how someone likes to work. So actually, they say, look, if you get an email from me at 9 o'clock, don't panic. That's because I've logged off for 4 hours. I'm really happy to then log back on. But then also they communicate saying, I don't expect you to be sat there, specifically for more junior members of the team who, you know, might want to make sure that they're interested, might want to kind of, oh, I've noticed that everyone seems to send emails still at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. That's the norm. That's what I should be doing. Actually, it's having that really open conversation to say, look, if you see me sending an email at that time, you don't need to reply. You reply on your own time. You reply when you are working. Don't feel like that pressure is there to have to reply. And I think having that open communication as we say, as an organisation, as a manager, whatever that looks like, it's almost embedding the right behaviours as a team so that everyone knows how to work.
It's a culture thing, isn't it? I think that's a big thing. Culture's massive. And especially during COVID, we've all done the working from home. I, for one, was absolutely buzzing to get back to the office and go out for like lunch with clients and see people and put clothes on instead of wearing pyjamas. So it's that sort of, I guess it's each to their own, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
a double-sided, double-edged sword, really, because it's got to work for the company that you work for, your employer. It's going to work for your clients, and it's also going to work for you. But there's got to be a middle ground, isn't there?
Yeah, and especially when it comes to the client side, you know, talk about those deadlines, we definitely had some over Christmas. Actually, you as a bid person, do you have the confidence? How do you go to maybe that more senior bid lead who's got that client contact to say, actually, I think we need to push back on this? And how do you present that to them in the right way? And then how do you work with them to present to the client in the right way to say, you know, we're not just being lazy and saying we want extra time. This is actually the impact on our team's well-being. And we know that you're not going to look at it over Christmas. How do we position it kind of on all fronts, as you say, to kind of get that collective within the industry?
Well, thank you, both of you. We're going to open up to questions if anyone's got any. Go for it.
I mean, just for Charlotte, really. Training opportunity. I just wondered. The members and organisation, are you planning to publish like a manifesto or a policy statement that sign up to?
Interesting. So our kind of objectives, they're based on our values, which we published last year, which are very much around that kind of individual, organisation and industry. But in terms of having something that we can actually take to people, it is a watch this space. We would really like to do that, and we would like to get some kind of key organisations, possibly some within this room, to almost join us on the journey to say, you know, this is the right way of working within our industry, and start getting other people on board. And that will be on a kind of individual and organisational level as well. So I might kind of pick a brain to this as well.
I did. Sorry, it's for Tony. On the social value side of things, you mentioned like how important it was for government bodies.
Yeah.
But recently, someone in the government, who I don't want to name because he's horrible, has said that they're looking at more of a value for money approach, kind of taking that social value, sustainability out of it. Like, what do you think the impact of that would be? Because I know we've worked, like a lot of people we've spoken to, work very hard with like organisations such as social profit calculator.
Yeah.
Does that make all that work redundant?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm really pleased you've asked it. No, but I think I think it's very interesting because the minister that is responsible for that I think it's actually come through changes, the opportunities of Brexit is the kind of rationale, and it's this idea of how the procurement can reflect kind of, you know, improving competitiveness within UK industries. The bit that I've found interesting is that companies have adopted social value. And going back to what I was saying earlier, is that actually it starts to become part of a brand identity, and it starts to be about the well-being of not only the workforce, but being a company that people want to work for. And so I think social value is already embedded in people's thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that the corporates that are leading on it are the ones that are leading on being innovative in a range of different ways. And the bit that's quite interesting about this whole idea of moving like more towards focusing on priorities than measuring everything is that the feedback people getting is they were measuring things they weren't even doing. And that was the challenge, is that there was a kind of, you know, one really good example of that is in Oxford, there's an issue around what's called kind of underemployment. So there's this skills dichotomy. There are huge skills gaps across Oxfordshire, but there are also lots of people that are underemployed. But a typical social value measurement would be unemployed people that you're getting into employment. Now that wouldn't reflect that need, because it was focused on part of the population that may well be an issue in other parts of the country that may not be there. So this idea of, I don't think social value is going anywhere. I think it's about having a sensible and mature conversation about measurement, actually.
Yeah.
About, you know, should we be measuring everything if actually we're not doing it? Should we focus on what the priorities are? You know, and this is where it goes back to that think global, act local piece. actually, in that. So I don't think any of the work you've been doing around social value is sort of waste at all, because the clients are driving it and the ESG investment community are driving it. And I actually think we should just be open-minded about how, you know, looking at measurement and thinking, let's make sure it works. You know, let's not have the tail wagging the dog where the measurement, yeah, because that's the bit that becomes really frustrating for people on projects. And I've seen this working for developers. The main contractors will say, well, why do I have to do all these things? With all these things you're asking me to do, I don't really need to do them. There isn't really a need. Do you know what I mean? So it's almost having a more kind of, you know, a richer conversation about purpose, actually. What's the purpose of what we're doing? Why are we doing it? What value is it bringing? And how can we demonstrate it? So I'd be kind of honest about the work you've done on social value, because it's not going anywhere from an ESG investment perspective, also from a corporate perspective, and also, quite frankly, you know, the whole talent piece, attracting talented people. People want to work for companies that do the right thing, and that's, so I think it's good.
Okay, good.
Keep up the work.
We've got another question, then we'll come to that. Then we'll come to that. You've got a queue, Jay.
I've got to follow on.
Yeah.
Because do you ever see the situation whereby the supply chain will drive clients with regard to the ESG strategy? And as much as, you know, we've heard about the limited resource. Everybody's got limited resources, so those big decisions are getting tougher to make.
Yeah.
And if there's clients coming to the market that are putting unreasonable constraints, 2-3 week deadlines that are achievable, which goes back to the well-being thing, or even to the fact that if they've not got the diversity and inclusion attached to it, that we as in the supply chain want to see, because that's what we're doing, will actually drive the behaviour of the client, because people actually spoke about it, because they don't want to be associated with it. Do you ever see that happen?
Yeah, well, a lot. And I think why that's a very interesting point is what I'm seeing quite a lot of is more a big connection between the clients and the broader supply chain. This whole kind of, we work, and it's your point really about working as an industry. So the developer actually is increasingly wanting to meet the big subcontractor that has a specific expertise or niche on a particular topic or area. And then it's about sharing that across. Legal and General is a very good example. So Legal and General are one of my clients. They're head of construction across their whole portfolio, which is huge because it includes kind of all of their residential. Like Damon Plan, he's a real innovator, but he looks for innovation and then he looks to share it across the supply chain. And that innovation may come from a main contractor, but it may actually come from a specialist subcontractor. So it's a really good point. And this is why I was saying, I think the lesson on that is to reach out and communicate with people and to build relationships with the clients and understand their needs and come to them with suggestions and ideas, because I think everything's a lot flatter now. I think culturally and structurally, people are open to listening to ideas and they want innovation. And that's what I think the role that you will do, and your point about social value, you know, rather than it becoming painful, which probably it can be sometimes, the amount of things you're having to fill out, and the amount of times clients will say to me, I'm filling out all these boxes of things that we don't do anything on at all. This is like main contractors saying to me, why am I filling out these boxes? You know, don't shoot the messenger by putting this measurement tool in place. But I think that's an important point, because we've all got limited time and resources, and we should be focusing our energies on where there's need. And a lot of what I do when I work with clients is do analysis of need. What is the actual need? And you often find that what the perceived need is different to the actual need. You need to dig a bit deeper and try and do a bit more investigation into what you're trying to do. And then you formulate an approach that's collaborative. You know, it's co-design, co-delivery of this, and that's where your point is spot on. Because you'd be amazed at how open clients are to those sort of ideas. But the key bit is when you do it, which is why I keep saying, go to your existing clients and do innovative stuff. Because if you're harassing someone at bid stage, they're thinking, well, of course you're trying to engage with me because you're trying to win a contract. And there's some integrity in picking up the phone to someone that isn't offering you work, that's already given you work, and just working out what you can do.
I'd say as well, in our experience, everything we're hearing is that bid no bids are now more important than ever, because it's just actually being stringent about what we want to vote on, not even just from a can we win it perspective, but actually do we want it? That's definitely becoming more important.
Come on, David.
I've got one for the internet.
Go for it.
I'm really
He's
impressed with that.
obsessed with this live stream.
I know.
Send that message. Thanks in advance.
We've got people watching us.
No, the question is, Susan, what's the best way to build a relationship with new business prospects? Like, is it via networking events? Is it a direct approach? And is wining and dining these days frowned upon?
No.
What's my question? When I'm with you on this first.
We've heard.
You want to go first or shall I?
You go.
Go
you
first.
go.
So in terms of engaging with clients, I actually think one of the best sort of tools to kind of broaden your network is actually LinkedIn. And I don't mean LinkedIn as in using LinkedIn by randomly kind of sending someone a LinkedIn message. But if there's a client that you want to understand better or have a relationship with, looking at who's in their network that you have an existing relationship with and building it organically and honestly. So it's all about integrity. So if you've got a particular client you want to engage with, and you've got another client where you've got evidence of doing a really good job for them, meet them for coffee and say, you know, this work I did with you on X, Y, or Z, I think this other individual that I haven't got a relationship with would be interested in it. Could you introduce us? Because actually that's how life works. You know, you kind of, I mean, I don't know if you agree, but I literally delete every spam email I ever get. And I get so many now. And there's this new thing where people say, hi, Tom, just quickly, or, you know, there's others, they know me. I'm kind of thinking, faintest idea who you are. And so to me, the effort that person has put into constructing those emails, they might as well be better off investing that time in building relationships with their actual clients and then demonstrating how they've done a good job. So that's that first bit. The bit around wining and dining, where I think that's a very good point, is the G element of ESG, which is governance. There are now really strict rules in place around what clients can and can't do in relation to kind of hospitality and seeing people. So my response to that is the best thing to do is to do lots of things around charities or around organisations that you can help as an industry, and invite people to charity events where they're also then supporting or sponsoring an industry-wide charity, because people are under a lot of scrutiny now. So that's why I think it's a relevant question, because it is often posed. But that's where maybe the answer to it is try and do good while we're enjoying charity.
I've worked across a few different industries, and they've all been very different in terms of their approach to wining and dining. I think definitely there's so many new rules and regulations around that. You have to be careful. From our experience in Women in Bids, the best thing we hear is networking events, because it gives you the option, you know, even if it's not necessarily about a topic that you're that familiar in, just turning up and being with other people, you get to know the key players, you get to know who you might want to work with, you just making those relationships, you never know what's going to come off the back of that. And from a more, I guess, Women in Bids focused perspective, there's actually a little bit of conflicting feelings really around that wining and dining, because there's often this view, and especially in very male dominated industries, of it's like boys club, and people have said, you know, they say, right, all the guys, let's go to the pub and watch the football, and there's women left in their bids team going, they've not invited me because A, they think I don't like football, or B, they think I don't want to go and drink beers. It's actually quite a difficult thing to approach if you're feeling like that. We've seen it quite a few times, and it's also difficult in terms of if that's what people have been used to doing, how do you change that? How do you offer something different? And what we've been advising is, as a team, actually, how do you offer different things? You might have teams who like to go out and drink. You might have people actually at breakfast, feed them in the morning and they'll love you. So maybe don't focus on, does it have to be wining and dining? Actually, there might be people who want to be wine and dine. There also might be people who want to go for a lunch or a coffee, or how can you find out what the individual people in your team and what you want? Don't feel that pressure that you have to take a certain route because that's what everyone else in your team does. If you want to go and take the cake, suggest it. Go down the route that you feel is more personable, fits your own values as a person, just what you want to do in terms of, I guess, work. Don't be pressured.
The only other thing I do want to plug a wonderful sponsor of the Great Britain Rugby Wheelchair Rugby League thing, and they do an amazing thing, which if any of you are interested in, I can introduce you to them, where you, as your company, you could all learn to do wheelchair rugby league. And these are the Great Britain team teaching you. It's a great team bonding thing, and from a diversity perspective, it gets you to appreciate what being a wheelchair user is actually like and how challenging it is. It's great fun. They're absolute mental. So you can exceed your expectations, and any of you that are interested in that, I can connect you, because that's a really nice thing to do as a team. And as you said, it's not just one and done, but actually, you know, if people want to go for drinks after, they can. So that to me is like a good example of where you can kind of do something that you think, well, actually, and this is this thing about what we were saying before about purpose. You know, try and do things with a bit of a broader purpose, because actually what you'll find is it's better. People remember it and they'll be like, that's really good.
Yeah, I love that. It's definitely listened to time, isn't it? So I'm going to wrap it up because my bum's gone now. I'm pretty sure that everyone else's has. Marky,
One question.
sniper in, go for it.
It's quite a specific question, so bear with me. We've talked about the words innovation, innovative, at least 10 times in this hour. We've got one of the most generous government schemes in and around research and development and innovation, but we are so far behind the OECD average in terms of spend for innovation. And it's probably more directed at Tom. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that's very kind of, I think, the biggest challenge for us as a country, but also opportunity for us, because we innovate all the time, but what we don't do is properly understand how to manage that innovation process so that the innovation that we do is captured properly, but also, as you said, the R&D tax relief that's available is great, and it's also something that whole industries could benefit from. And I think the reason that doesn't happen is the point that people are too busy. So what happens is people are getting on with their day job, and then someone says, "Oh, have you thought about R&D tax relief?" And then the finance person goes, "Got enough. I need to get this in." But actually, where I think you make a good point, and this is something that I'm talking to a lot of clients around, is how we start to embed innovation as a cultural theme that is weaved into the DNA. So in the same way you might have health and safety meetings, you have innovation meetings. So you bring all of the supply chain together at regular times, and the specific focus is on innovation. And as you know, the R&D tax relief rules are very specific around what that innovation is. You can't just say it's innovation, it needs to meet certain criteria. But I find I've run a couple of meetings like that. They're good fun. You know, it's almost like people coming up with weird and wonderful ideas, some of which you say, I think we'll park that. But, you know, there are. You just do more than that. So they make some innovative piece of legislation to respond to it, and then everyone is too busy with their day job. And then we will say, well, why haven't we used, why is there a £2 billion underspend in the apprenticeship levy? Ridiculous. Now, why are all companies not having a head of innovation? Because actually they could, and the supply chain And again, it goes back to this point really about competition and the UK being competitive for a global economy. That's the bit that's interesting. You know, that we can capture this innovation and we can start rolling it out to improve the whole world. Because actually that's kind of quite a tangible kind of objective that we can focus on. But I just think people are too busy. I think people are busy with their day job. I know that's not probably what you want to hear.
I think the word tax as well, tax says a lot of people when you talk about how schemes in place, as soon as somebody uses the word tax, like, you know, we invest in HMRC, right?
Yeah.
That one word, if it was changed, then I think there's a lot of opportunity.
I agree. I also think the other bit that's interesting about what you just said is that HMRC wants to have that dialogue because the other point is if the country is constantly investing in innovation, and you've probably seen it because it sounds as though you're close to it, there's a massive kind of correlation between economies that invest in innovation whose GDP goes up exponentially. Now, it's not got an idea, it's fact and there's evidence of it. So the reason that the government is wanting people to invest in R&D and innovation is because that's how they see the economy growing. And that's the bit where, and that's why it's nice to come to things like this, isn't it, and talk about it, because often you need space, go back to the time, you need space to reflect and think about things. Actually, it's often in these sort of environments where you can have dialogue and kick ideas around that a lot of that innovation is sparked. So good question, thanks.
He's full of them. I'm not going to let him ask him. So, thank you for all joining us, and thank you to Hobs as well, and Craig, for allowing us to take our time out of the business to work on a project that was really, really close to all of our hearts. And just wanted to bring everyone back together really and build a bit of a community, which I think we've actually done, not realising that we've done it as good as what we actually wanted to do. Does that make sense? It's actually better than what we thought it was. I'll probably get sacked now. Is that hot? But thank you for all joining us. I'm conscious that we've got half an hour of networking time, and I know a lot of you have been talking, but I'm also going to do on about innovation. We've actually got a 3D event, which is totally free of charge. It's an open day. There is wine there. Literally round the corner, 200. That way.
That way.
It's over there. Thank you guys
okay.
at the back. Sit down. So it's actually at our Farringdon location. So we've got 3D prints, we've got augmented and virtual reality, we've got animations, everything 3D. So we've got all the kit in Farringdon. So if you do want to walk around the corner and have a glass of vino and try some Oculus Rift headsets, then you are welcome to. And I can walk you all around in 20 minutes and whatnot. So yeah, thank you again for joining us, and thank you for being part of it. Roll on the next one. Thanks very much.